A verse-by-verse study in the Book of Judges, ESV, with Irv Risch, Chapter 11. What does Judges chapter 11 mean? Judges 11 begins the story Jephthah, one of the most complex of Israel's judges, Judges 2 verse 16. Depending on how one interprets his character, he could be considered a powerful warrior or a leader of gangsters. He seems to have trusted in the Lord, but also made senseless vows. He rescued Israel from oppression, but also engaged in civil war against other Israelites. Jephthah is the oldest son of a prostitute and a man named Gilead. His father bears the same name as the region in which they live. Gilead's sons by his legitimate wife drive Jephthah away from their home when they are grown. Their goal is to keep him from sharing in their father's inheritance. Jephthah flees from Gilead to a land called Tob, where he gains his reputation as a warrior. This comes as the leader of what appears to be a group of bandits, Judges 11 verses 1 to 3. Meanwhile, the Ammonites have been oppressing Israel for many years, Judges 10 verses 7 to 8. They now stage another offensive against the region of Gilead, Judges 10 verses 17 to 18, on the east side of the Jordan River. The Israelites in Gilead want to fight back against the Ammonites. To do so effectively, they need an experienced leader. The elders of Gilead travel to the land of Tob to offer Jephthah the job of commander of the army, Judges 11 verses 4 to 6. Jephthah objects, blaming the leaders of Gilead for being complacent while his brothers drove him away. They insist they want him back to help in the fight against the Ammonites. The elders agree to make Jephthah head over all the people of Gilead, including themselves, if he will lead them. Jephthah agrees and returns with the elders to Mizpah, where he takes the oath and becomes the functional leader of the region, Judges 11 verses 7 to 11. The Ammonites are massed not far away from Mizpah. Before engaging in battle, Jephthah attempts to negotiate with them. He asks the Ammonite king why he is attacking their land. The king replies that the Israelites wrongly took the land of Gilead from his ancestors during the time of Moses. Jephthah responds with a long message of his own. In it, he clearly shows that the Ammonite king's claim is false. Gilead never belonged to the Ammonites. The Amorites lost it when they attacked Israel for attempting to pass through peaceably. Gilead was given to Israel by God himself, and for 300 years, Ammon has made no claims to it, Judges 11 verses 12 to 26. Jephthah's message concludes by insisting that Israel has never harmed the Ammonites. He firmly asks the king of Ammon not to sin against Israel by making unjust war. The king refuses to listen to these arguments. Most likely, his earlier excuse was just that, a casual lie meant to justify his aggression, Judges 11 verses 27 to 28. For the first time in this passage, the Lord's Spirit comes on Jephthah. He successfully recruits fighters from Gilead and the larger territory of the tribe of Manasseh. He then prepares to attack the Ammonites from Israel's base at Mizpah. Before the battle, however, Jephthah makes a tragically misguided vow. He promises God to offer, as a burnt offering, whatever or whomever comes to meet him if he returns in victory. The wording of this vow and Jephthah's intent are among the most debated words in the entire Bible. Jephthah attacks and utterly defeats the Ammonites, completely turning back Israel's enemy from being any further immediate threat, Judges 11 verses 29 to 33. Jephthah arrives home safely to Mizpah following this victory over Ammon. His daughter, his one and only child, comes out of his house to greet him with tambourines and dancing. Jephthah remembers his vow. He tears his clothes in grief, telling his daughter about what he has promised the Lord. Depending on what his intentions were, he was either obligated to offer her as a human sacrifice, Deuteronomy 12 verse 31, 18:10, or devote the rest of her life to service to God. For her part, the daughter agrees that the vow must be kept. She says Jephthah must do to her as he vowed since the Lord gave victory, Judges 11 verses 34 to 36. What the daughter requests from Jephthah is among the reasons some interpreters believe she became a religious devotee, rather than a sacrifice. Her primary regret is that she will never have children, not that she will die. Rather than act immediately, Jephthah agrees to his daughter's request, 2 months of freedom to travel in the mountains with her friends and grieve that she will never marry or have children. Jephthah then carries out the vow, in whatever fashion that implies. For years afterward, the women of Israel would grieve for the daughter of Jephthah, for 4 days every year, Judges 11 verses 37 to 39. Chapter context. Judges 11 answers the question raised at the end of the previous chapter: who could lead Gilead's fight against the Ammonites? The elders recruit Jephthah, a warrior driven away by his family in Gilead. Jephthah agrees to return and is appointed leader of Gilead. Jephthah raises an army and makes a foolish vow to the Lord in exchange for victory. Israel defeats Ammon, but Jephthah's vow costs him his only child, his daughter. His victory also creates civil strife in Israel, leading to a minor civil war. Verse by verse. Verse 1. Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah. The previous chapter ended with Israelite leaders in Gilead looking for someone to lead their fighters in battle against the invading Ammonites, Judges 10 verse 17. Chapter 11 begins immediately to tell Jephthah's story, as he will be the answer to their question, who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? Judges 10 verse 18. Jephthah was from the region of Gilead, east of the Jordan River. In fact, his father bore the family name of Gilead. This would normally have given Jephthah a privileged status if it weren't for his mother. Jephthah's mother was a prostitute, meaning he was born through his father's immorality. Even if his father weren't criticized for that sin, Israelite culture would have considered any children from such a relationship to be less than legitimate, Judges 8 verses 30 to 31, 9-18. We're not told whether Jephthah's mother was an Israelite or a Canaanite woman. It's possible she was a temple prostitute, meaning that Jephthah's father may have visited her while participating in the worship of false gods. If she were an Israelite, the other Israelites would have seen her as an especially shameful woman. In either case, the son of a prostitute often loses all standing in that culture, no matter who his father might be. Jephthah is described as a mighty warrior, using the Hebrew phrase Gibber Hayil. An angel used the same phrase to describe Gideon, Judges 6 verse 12, and by the writer of 1 Kings in reference to the accomplished general Naaman, 2 Kings 5 verse 1. It can refer to royalty or wealthy men, but that doesn't fit the context of Jephthah's life. As described here, Jephthah is a man of war, Judges 11:3, 32 to 33. Context summary. Judges 11 verses 1 to 11 introduces Jephthah as the unlikely answer to the dilemma of the previous chapter, Judges 10 verses 17 to 18. Jephthah is a warrior called to lead Gilead against the Ammonites. Though he had been driven from Gilead by his people, he agrees to return if the elders will make him their leader. Verse 2. And Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. Jephthah has been described as a mighty warrior, Judges 11 verse 1, but he begins his independent adult life being exiled by his own brothers. Though he is possibly the firstborn of his father Gilead, Jephthah is the son of a prostitute. Gilead has other sons by his legitimate wife. Those sons, Jephthah's brothers, drive him away from the family for the sake of the inheritance. During ancient times, it was common for the firstborn son to receive a double share of the inheritance. That would make Jephthah's brothers more eager to reject him, so that even if they split the inheritance equally, they would get more. Even as the son of a prostitute, Jephthah was recognized by his father, and so entitled to his share of his father's estate. Yet he did not have social standing to push back against threats from his brothers. So, he runs away to begin a new life on his own. Verse 3. Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. Some of Israel's greatest heroes came from unlikely beginnings. Gideon, the previous judge, was hiding his food from the enemy when an angel commissioned him to fight, Judges 6 verses 11 to 12. Jephthah will become a renowned rescuer of Israel, despite his own humble origins. Not only is he the son of a prostitute, but also his own brothers ran him out of the family to avoid sharing inheritance with him. Jephthah is on his own, socially and economically. Jephthah flees to a region described as the land of Tob. Some scholars believe this to be an area in Gilead somewhere west of Mount Horon, though the evidence is not conclusive. There, he proves to be a charismatic figure and natural leader. Alone in a strange territory, he begins to attract a following. His fellows are not the best and brightest of their culture, these are men on the less reputable side of society and the law. In fact, they are described using the same term given to Abimelech's hired goons, Judges 9 verse 4. These are men of low moral character. That Jephthah goes out with such men implies a party of bandits. This group might have raided towns or other targets to make their living. Jephthah's reputation may have developed in much the same way as did famous pirates, known and feared for their exploits. Verse 4. After a time the Ammonites made war against Israel. The previous chapter described how God subjected Israel under the Ammonites and Philistines. Israel had been crushed under the oppression of these two nations for the past 18 years, Judges 10 verses 7 to 8. The Ammonites struck Israel from the east, especially the people of Gilead on the east side of the Jordan River. Now they were back making war against Israel once more. In this case, Israel had made an important change. God's people had repented for their sin of serving the false gods of Canaan. They had cried out to the Lord to deliver them from their oppressors, Judges 10 verses 10 to 16. God's willingness to let Israel suffer was reaching its limit. The people of Gilead had fashioned an army of sorts to stand against the Ammonites. The problem was they had nobody to lead them into battle. That's where Jephthah, Judges 11 verses 1 to 3, an exiled hooligan, will soon come into the picture. Verse 5. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. The elders of Gilead have a problem. Their people are willing to take a stand against the invading Ammonites, Judges 10 verses 17 to 18, but have no one to lead them into battle. They need someone with combat experience to give them direction and confidence. Apparently, time has run out, and the Ammonites are on the move, Judges 11 verse 4. Someone has the idea to approach Jephthah, Judges 11 verses 1 to 2, about taking on this role. By this time, he has gained a reputation as the leader of a successful band of morally empty men, Judges 11 verse 3. This band of hooligans worked as brigands and bandits in the land of Tob. Even if Jephthah was renowned as a leader of fighters, that the elders of Gilead went to Tob to try and bring him back shows their desperation. Jephthah was the son of a prostitute who had been cruelly chased away by his own brothers. What motive could he have to come and lead the Israelites into battle with their enemies? Verse 6. And they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites." The leaders of Gilead have left their territory on a recruiting mission. They need an experienced military leader to direct their people in the fight against invading Ammonites. They've come to the region of Tob, perhaps not far from Gilead, to ask an unlikely candidate to take that role. Both the trip and their intended target are signs of desperation. With the Ammonites beginning to attack, Judges 11 verse 4, they seem to have no choice but to beg an exiled bandit leader for help. Jephthah's experience is as the leader of a band of worthless men who likely rob and pillage for a living, Judges 9 verse 4, 11:3. Further, the leaders of Gilead were complicit in chasing Jephthah out of Gilead in the first place, along with his own brothers, Judges 11 verses 1 to 2. Jephthah's initial response will show he has not forgotten this fact, Judges 11 verse 7. Verse 7. But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, Did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress? Jephthah raises an obvious question. The leaders of Gilead have come to him to ask for help. They want him to lead their people in battle against the invading, oppressive Ammonites, Judges 10 verses 17 to 18, 11:4. Gilead is so desperate for a qualified military leader that they're willing to offer the job to an exile and the leader of a band of criminals, Judges 11 verses 1 to 3. As one might expect from an outcast and leader of rough men, Judges 9 verse 4, Jephthah wants to know two things: why and what's in it for him. He asks bluntly if these men forgot that they, likely meaning the leaders of Gilead, in general, hated him and helped drive him out of his father's house. Earlier verses describe Jephthah's half-brothers, the sons of his father's wife, running him off to keep the inheritance for themselves. In some way, the elders of Gilead were also involved in Jephthah's removal from his family home. That might have been as simple as doing nothing to stop that injustice from happening. It might have meant they agreed and actively worked to have Jephthah exiled. Most likely, Jephthah doesn't only want to know why they have tracked him down. It's all but certain he knows what's happening with the Ammonites. Most likely, a question like this has a dual purpose. Stating prior history is a way of starting negotiations with the leaders of Gilead. If they need him so badly, and there's something he can gain by it, he wants to be sure it's worth his while. Verse 8. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, That is why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Showing how desperate they are for a military leader to fight the Ammonites, Judges 10 verses 17 to 18, 11:4, the leaders of Gilead have traveled to Tob to recruit Jephthah. He appears to be the only viable option, although his skills have come from leading worthless men in criminal activity, and that involvement was the result of Gilead driving him out of his father's home, Judges 11 verses 1 to 3. Jephthah has pushed back, pointing out that the same society that shunned him now wants his aid. Do they really expect him to come to the rescue now that they're in trouble? To show how serious they are, the elders of Gilead tell Jephthah their offer: if he comes home to lead in battle against the Ammonites, he will be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. The assumption is that he needs to win for this to be granted, but if he does, he would be the head of the entire territory. The situation resembles the offer made by leaders of Shechem to Abimelech, after the death of Gideon, Judges 9 verses 1 to 6. Jephthah is interested, but he wants to be clear about the specifics of this offer, Judges 11 verses 9 to 11. Verse 9. Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, If you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head. For the first time in this discussion, Judges 11 verses 4 to 8, Jephthah introduces the topic of the Lord's will over Israel's defeats and victories. In the previous chapter, the people of Israel asked God to deliver them from their oppressors. The Lord said no, but then the people put away all their idols and began to serve the Lord again, Judges 10 verses 10 to 16. Jephthah, at least, expresses that whether he succeeds or fails in leading Gilead to victory over Ammon will be the Lord's doing, not his. Still, he wants the leaders of Gilead to be clear. If he returns to Gilead and the Lord gives him victory over the Ammonites, he intends to be leader over the elders of Gilead, as well as the inhabitants, as they had said in the previous verse. In short, Jephthah expects to become governor, or a local king, though no such label is attached. Regardless of the term used, he wants a guarantee that he will rule over all of them, despite how they help drive him away, and that he has been a leader over worthless men up to this point. Verse 10. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, The Lord will be witness between us, if we do not do as you say. Jephthah was the first to bring God's will into the conversation about leading fighters of Gilead against the Ammonites, Judges 11 verses 4 to 9. He put any chance of victory squarely in the Lord's hands, saying that he would become leader over the elders and all the people of Gilead only if the Lord gave the Ammonites over to him. Here, the elders of Gilead matched Jephthah's commitment to the Lord. They place themselves under threat of the Lord's judgment if they do not follow through in making Jephthah the leader over all of Gilead, including themselves. This, of course, presumes that he succeeds and defeats the Ammonites. In that era and culture, this was as firm a contract as one could ask for. Jephthah will take the job, Judges 11 verse 11. Verse 11. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. Many figures in the book of Judges are accurately described as complicated. Jephthah certainly fits that label. He is the son of a prostitute, Judges 11 verse 1, driven from his own home by his half-brothers, Judges 11 verse 2. He runs from Gilead to Tob and becomes the leader of a band of goons who become well known for their successful victories, Judges 11 verse 3. And yet, when recruited by the elders of his former people, Jephthah acknowledges that military victory will come only if the Lord wills it, Judges 11 verses 4 to 9. He agrees to the deal only when the elders place themselves under God's judgment if they go back on their word, Judges 11 verse 10. Now Jephthah and the elders of Gilead arrive at Mizpah. This is where Gilead's fighters are encamped against the army of the Ammonites. In view of the people, the elders make the arrangement official. Jephthah becomes their governor, of sorts, including control of the military, all the citizens, and the elders themselves. For his part, Jephthah seals the agreement with a speech of some kind. He makes this speech before the Lord, meaning that he is holding himself accountable before God in this new role he has accepted as the leader of Gilead. To this point in the story, however, there is still a question of whether the Lord wants Jephthah to lead Gilead. His will has been mentioned, but his own statements have not been heard, despite Jephthah and the elders acknowledging his lordship. The proof may be in whether the Lord grants victory to Jephthah and Gilead. Verse 12. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said, What do you have against me, that you have come to me to fight against my land? Jephthah has just been made ruler of Gilead and leader of its fighting forces, Judges 11 verse 11. He immediately takes ownership of his new role and goes to work. Jephthah acts very much as a king might do in similar circumstances. He presents himself as the rightful representative of Gilead. As such, attacks from the Ammonites are a personal insult against himself. He sends messengers to the king of the Ammonites to begin diplomatic negotiations. Jephthah's aim is to understand why the Ammonites believe Gilead belongs to them, rather than to Jephthah and his people. His first message implies a question: What do you have against me that you feel justified in fighting against my land? What right do you think you have to our territory? Context summary: Judges 11 verses 12 to 28 is Jephthah's attempt to negotiate with the Ammonites. He exchanges messages with the king of Ammon, asking the reason for this war on their land. Jephthah corrects the king's response that Israel wrongly took the land from them during the time of Moses. He offers several forms of rebuttal. Jephthah notes that Ammon was never in control of Gilead. Instead, the Amorites attacked Israel and God gave his people victory. Greater kings have not attempted to take the region away, it had not been disputed for centuries. However, the Ammonite king will not listen. Verse 13. And the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, Because Israel on coming up from Egypt took away my land, from the Arnon to the Jabbok and to the Jordan, now therefore restore it peaceably. The army of the Ammonites is mounted for war against the Israelite people of the region of Gilead, Judges 10 verses 17 to 18, 11:11. Bordered to the west by the Jordan River, Gilead's territory includes all the land south of the Jabbok River and north of the Arnon River, Deuteronomy 3 verse 16. The territory controlled by Ammon, farther to the east, does not have such defined borders. Newly appointed as leader of the people of Gilead, Jephthah has sent a message to the king of Ammon. He wants to know why the Ammonites are trying to take their land. In response, the king of Ammon claims the people of Israel took the land from them when they came out of Egypt. He is describing a time after the Exodus, when Moses was leading God's people toward the Promised Land, Exodus 12 verses 50 to 51. During that time, Moses and Israel successfully defeated the inhabitants of the region known as Gilead and took possession of the land, Numbers 21:24-26. To hear it told by the king of Ammon, this justifies his war against the people of Gilead. He claims he is taking back what originally belonged to this people some 300 years earlier. If Jephthah will just give the land back, the king of Ammon implies, this entire nasty business can all be over. As Jephthah will point out, however, this land never belonged to the Ammonites in the first place, Judges 11 verses 14 to 15. Verse 14. Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites. Given that Jephthah was previously leader of a raiding band, Judges 11 verse 3, it is interesting that he did not immediately attack the Ammonites after taking over the leadership of Gilead, Judges 11 verse 11. Instead, he has begun with negotiation, conducted through messengers sent between himself and the king of Ammon. Jephthah is conducting himself exactly as king might. He speaks authoritatively on behalf of the people of Gilead. He has asked what the king of Ammon has against him, as if he himself is Gilead, Judges 11 verses 12 to 13. The king of Ammon replied with an interesting claim, that he is attacking the Israelites to get back what Israel took from his people 300 years earlier after the Israelites came out of Egypt, Exodus 12 verses 50 to 51. In this way, the king of Ammon justifies his cause since the land belongs to him and his people. Jephthah will go into an impressive amount of detail about Israel's history, Judges 11 verse 15, showing that the king of Ammon has his facts wrong. Verse 15. And said to him, Thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. The king of Ammon has replied to a message from Jephthah, asking why the Ammonites are preparing to attack Gilead, Judges 11 verses 12 to 14. According to the king, the land originally belonged to the Ammonites. He suggests it was taken by Israel after the Israelites came up out of Egypt over 300 years earlier, Exodus 12 verses 50 to 51. Jephthah has now sent another group of envoys to Ammon with a detailed response. He intends to show that the king is factually wrong about his claim. This verse contains Jephthah's opening statement, supported with several arguments over the following verses. This history lesson starts with a clear and concise statement, Israel did no such thing. At the time of this discussion, Moab possessed a region east of the Dead Sea to the south of Gilead. Verse 16. But when they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Jephthah has sent envoys to the king of Ammon with a long message. He is answering the king's charge that Israel stole the land of Gilead from the Ammonites after they first came out of Egypt, Judges 11 verses 12 to 14. Jephthah's message has declared that this did not happen, Judges 11 verse 15. Now he begins to give several arguments to support this perspective. First, Jephthah recounts how, near the end of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the Israelites came up from the direction of Egypt through the wilderness. They moved toward the Red Sea and eventually arrived at Kadesh, also known as Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh was south and west of the Dead Sea. Moses' sister Miriam died while they were at Kadesh, and Moses struck the rock to get water instead of speaking to it, as the Lord told him to do, Numbers 20:1-13. Jephthah will go on to describe how careful Israel was not even to cut across the lands of the Edomites and Moabites since they did not have permission to do so, Judges 11 verse 17. Verse 17. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, Please let us pass through your land, but the king of Edom would not listen. And they sent also to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. This is part of a response sent by Jephthah, through messengers, to the king of Ammon, Judges 11 verses 12 to 14. He is explaining how and why the Ammonite ruler is wrong about the people of Israel improperly taking Gilead during the time of Moses. He has described how Israel came to be camped at Kadesh, south and west of the Dead Sea, Judges 11 verses 15 to 16. Eventually, the time came for Israel to travel to the east side of the Jordan River and cross over into Canaan. The quickest way for the Israelites to get to the right place would have been through the territories of the Edomites and the Moabites. However, the Lord had been clear that they were not to fight with either nation. The Edomites were the descendants of Isaac's son Esau, and their land was given to them by God, Deuteronomy 2 verses 4 to 6. In the same way, the Moabites were the descendants of Abraham's nephew Lot, and they also possessed land set aside for them by God, Deuteronomy 2 verse 9. So, the Israelites sent messengers to the king of Edom, respectfully asking to pass through his land. They offered to pay for any resources they used along the way. The king forcefully refused, Numbers 20:14-21. The king of Moab refused, as well. To obey God, Israel was forced to linger in Kadesh and take the long way around to reach their destination. Jephthah's point to the king of Ammon is that Israel did not simply take land. They sought nothing which was not given to them by the Lord, as Ammon was accusing them. Verse 18. Then they journeyed through the wilderness and went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab and arrived on the east side of the land of Moab and camped on the other side of the Arnon. But they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. The king of Ammon claimed Israel took their land back in the time of Moses, Judges 11 verses 12 to 13. He refers to the land of Gilead, east of the Jordan between the Jabbok and Arnon rivers. Jephthah has countered this, showing that the Israelites did not even walk across the lands of the Edomites or Moabites without their permission, Numbers 20:14-21. They certainly didn't steal their land, Judges 11 verses 14 to 17. Instead, the Israelites took the long way around to reach Gilead, arriving on the east side of the Jordan River to the north of Arnon River. This would allow them to avoid Moabite territory to the south. The point of this detail is to note that the Ammonites were not occupying this area at that time. The land of the Ammonites was still further east into the wilderness. It was also true that God had told the Israelites not to fight with the Ammonites, because they were also descendants of Lot, Deuteronomy 2 verses 16 to 22. At that time, the Ammonites were not in the area now known as Gilead. There were other people in the region, however. Verse 19. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, "Please let us pass through your land to our country." Jephthah is explaining that the king of Ammon is wrong in claiming Gilead belonged to his people before being stolen by the Israelites. For one thing, Israel went to great pains to avoid even stepping foot in lands belonging to other peoples, Numbers 20:14-21, on their way across the Jordan River into the land of Canaan, Judges 11 verses 12 to 18. When they did arrive in territory of Gilead, the Ammonites were not yet there. They were farther east. Further, the Israelites did not even want to stay in Gilead. They just wanted to cross over the Jordan and move on. To do so, though, they would have to travel through the region that became known as Gilead, and it was occupied by the Amorites, not the Ammonites. Since the Israelites were still not interested in war on the east side of the Jordan, they sent messengers to the king of the Amorites and king of Heshbon. They requested to travel through those territories to get to their own land. The overall point of Jephthah's history lesson to the king of Ammon is that Ammonites were not involved in any of this. Verse 20. But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory, so Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. Through messengers, Jephthah is describing everything Israel did to try to avoid conflict while crossing over the Jordan River during time of Moses. He is delivering this history lesson in response to the Ammonite king's wrong assertion, that Israel stole the land of Gilead from Ammon, Judges 11 verses 12 to 14. Jephthah's main point has been that the Ammonites were not even occupying the land that close to the Jordan, Judges 11 verses 15 to 19. Instead, the land was then occupied by the Amorites, an entirely different people. The Israelites wanted to pass through the land to get to the other side of the Jordan, so they sent a message to Sihon, king of the Amorites, asking permission. Sihon never answered the request. He did not trust the Israelites, assuming they were there to take the land from him. Instead of answering their question, he quickly gathered his army at Jahaz, and attacked the Israelites, Numbers 21:21-23. Jephthah is proving that the king of Ammon was not only wrong about Ammonites occupying the land at the time, but he was also wrong about who attacked whom. It was the local Amorites that attacked Israel, not the other way around. Verse 21. And the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of all the land of the Amorites, who inhabited that country. Jephthah's main point in this message to the king of Ammon is this: the Israelites did not take Gilead from you during the time of Moses. The Amorites lived there, not the Ammonites. The Amorites attacked the Israelites and not the other way around, Judges 11 verses 12 to 20. Israel conquered the land, however. That happened when King Sihon and the Amorites attacked Israel instead of letting them pass through peacefully, Numbers 21:21-23. The Lord gave Israel the victory in that battle. He gave the land of Gilead to Israel by an act of his own will, through the choice of the Amorite king, and so Israel took possession of it. That's how it came to them. Verse 22. And they took possession of all the territory of the Amorites from the Arnon to the Jabbok and from the wilderness to the Jordan. This lays out the borders of the disputed territory of Gilead. This is the region which the Ammonite army is preparing to attack. Their intent is to take this land from Israel, Judges 10 verses 17 to 18, 11:4. Gilead prepared by making Jephthah their leader, Judges 11 verses 4 to 11. When he confronted the king of Ammon about the impending invasion, he was given a curious response. The enemy king claimed Israel took the territory from them centuries earlier, during the time of Moses, Judges 11 verses 12 to 13. In response, Jephthah has sent a history lesson to the king, Judges 11 verses 14 to 21. He has noted that the original inhabitants of the land were Amorites, not Ammonites. Further, these Amorites had attacked Israel without provocation. Since it was the Lord who gave Israel victory over the Amorites, at that time, it was God who gave the land to Israel. He also notes, later, Judges 11 verse 26, that since the area was conquered its ownership has not been in dispute. Jephthah defines the borders of Gilead since Moses' era as stretching from the Arnon River in the south to the Jabbok River in the north. It runs from the Jordan River east to the beginning of the region known simply as the wilderness. The Ammonites possessed a territory of land in the wilderness, but they wanted to take from Israel all the land up to the Jordan River and some distance beyond. Verse 23. So then the Lord, the God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites from before his people Israel, and are you to take possession of them? Jephthah, the brand new leader of the Israelite people in Gilead, has sent a long message to the king of Ammon. The missive included a history lesson correcting the king's wrongful claim. The Ammonite leader claimed that Gilead was territory taken from his people by Israel during the time of Moses. Jephthah has shown that there were not Ammonites in Gilead when Moses arrived, the inhabitants were Amorites. The Israelites took it over after the Amorites attacked and were defeated, Judges 11 verses 14 to 22. This verse contains the heart of Jephthah's argument. God gave this land to Israel when he gave them victory over the Amorites. The fact that Israel had possessed the land, for centuries, Judges 11 verse 26, was evidence that it was the Lord's divine will for Israel to have it. Jephthah poses a challenging question to the Ammonite king: are you going to try and take from Israel what God has given them? Another way to phrase this part of Jephthah's message is that Ammon's argument is with God himself, not with Israel or any other leader. The Israelites living in Gilead have simply received what the Lord has given to them. Who are the Ammonites to defy the Lord God in this way? Jephthah will continue by highlighting the fact that no one has thought to dispute the territory from Moses until now. Verse 24. Will you not possess what Chemosh your God gives you to possess? And all that the Lord our God has dispossessed before us, we will possess. In prior verses, Jephthah completed his historical argument for why Gilead belongs to the Israelites. The enemy king was wrong. Israel did not take the land from Ammonites during the era of Moses. Rather, Israel was attacked by the resident Amorites, who were defeated. In short, the Lord God of Israel gave it to his people. Judges 11 verses 14 to 23. Here, Jephthah continues to explore this theological argument. He has said the territory was given by God, asking if the king of Ammon is attempting to overthrow the will of the Lord. Now Jephthah adds one of the gods of the Ammonites to his argument. Don't they believe their God, Chemosh, has given them the lands they already possess? Would they give up land they believe to be given to them by Chemosh just because someone asked them to do so? That's what Ammon has asked Jephthah to do, to peaceably hand over the territory. Judges 11 verse 13. The implied answer is clearly, no. It would be unreasonable for a nation to give away what they believe was given by the divine will of their deity. Jephthah is pointing out that Ammon's king is making an absurd suggestion. The Israelites in Gilead would have no reason to give up the land the Lord dispossessed for them. Even if Ammon's king does not believe in the God of Israel, he must realize that Israel believes the Lord removed the Amorites from that land. The Israelites will not defy his will by giving it away to the Ammonites. Jephthah probably does not believe that Chemosh is a real deity who gave land to the Ammonites. Faithful Israelites believed firmly the Lord was the only true God, Exodus 20 verses 1 to 23, and that he was sovereign over the possession of all land. That included the land promised to Israel. Jephthah is making a logical point, appealing to ideas the king of Ammon likely already believes. Scholars point out that Chemosh is usually identified as a deity of the Moabites. The Ammonites typically worshipped Molech. One possible explanation is that Jephthah made a mistake. The book of Judges records his statement but does not specifically comment on its accuracy. Others speculate the Ammonites may have worshipped Chemosh alongside Molech. Another theory connects to a tradition which claimed Chemosh gave the Ammonites their land while angry with the Moabites. Yet another idea is that Jephthah was intentionally antagonizing the king by suggesting his land was given to him by a rival god instead of his own. His references to greater kings in the next verses are nearly a taunt and might be an echo of that same approach. Judges 11 verse 25. Verse 25. Now are you any better than Balak the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever contend against Israel, or did he ever go to war with them? Jephthah now arrives at a third argument countering the king of Ammon, Judges 11 verse 13. This enemy ruler is entirely wrong in thinking his people have any right to the land of Gilead. Jephthah's historical argument was simply that the Ammonites never possessed the land in the first place, Judges 11 verses 14 to 22. His theological argument is that the Lord God of Israel gave the land to the Israelites, meaning it was his divine will for Israel to possess it, Judges 11 verses 23 to 24. This final point is that other, better kings have not tried to take Gilead from Israel. Balak was the king of the nearby Moabites when Israel came into possession of the land of Gilead, Numbers 22:1-3. Balak was terrified of Israel, and he unsuccessfully tried to get the prophet Balaam to curse Israel on behalf of the Moabites, Numbers 22:24. King Balak, however, did not go to war against Israel for the bordering land of Gilead. That is Jephthah's point to the current king of Ammon. Even famous King Balak did not attempt what you're trying to do. Verse 26. While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and in all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon, 300 years, why did you not deliver them within that time? The Ammonites are encamped against Israel and ready to go to war against Gilead, east of the Jordan River, Judges 10 verses 17 to 18, 11:4. The king of Ammon claims his cause is just, suggesting the Israelites took the land from his people centuries earlier, Judges 11 verse 14. Jephthah has offered 3 counterarguments to show that this is wrong. First, the Ammonites did not even possess the land of Gilead when Israel took possession of it, Judges 11 verses 14 to 22. Second, it was the Lord that gave the land to Israel, meaning that it belonged to them by God's divine will, Judges 11 verses 23 to 24. Third, kings more prestigious than the current king of Ammon knew better than to try to take Gilead from Israel. That included Balak, the famous king of Moab during that time, Judges 11 verse 15. The fourth argument is simply one of time. It has been multiple generations since Israel has occupied this territory. Israel has had villages all over Gilead during that entire time. If the Ammonites truly had a claim on the land, why did they wait 3 centuries to try to take it back? Wouldn't they have attacked hundreds of years earlier if they believed this to be true? An implied aspect of Jephthah's claim here is an accusation, that the king of Ammon is simply lying. Noting the long delay before any action was taken suggests Ammon's king is fabricating this claim to the land, trying to fool others into thinking his war is a just one. Verse 27. I therefore have not sinned against you, and you do me wrong by making war on me. The Lord, the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. Jephthah has made a clear case that the Ammonites have no valid reasons to attack the Israelites in Gilead. He sent messengers from his own military encampment in Mizpah to the king of Ammon, gathered with his own army for war not far away, Judges 11 verse 4. The king of Ammon claimed Israel took land that rightfully belonged to his people several centuries earlier. He even demanded Jephthah restore it peaceably, a veiled threat that an invasion was imminent, Judges 11 verse 13. Jephthah's long response offered at least 4 arguments for why the king of Ammon was wrong in this claim, Judges 11 verses 14 to 26. Now he concludes his message with a simple statement, I've done nothing wrong to you. You do wrong by making war on me. This summarizes the Ammonite aggression as an unjust power grab for land and power at the expense of the Israelites. Jephthah's message frames the entire conflict as a personal matter, though he has only become the leader of Gilead days earlier, Judges 11 verses 5 to 11. His message pictures this war as a wrongful attack by the king of Ammon on his own person. As far as Jephthah is concerned, he is Gilead. And yet, Jephthah concludes by clearly stating that God, not Jephthah himself, will decide the matter between the Israelites and the Ammonites. In this way, Jephthah expresses his trust in the Lord's power to save Israel. He trusts the Lord's justice in deciding the dispute, even on the battlefield. Verse 28. But the king of the Ammonites did not listen to the words of Jephthah that he sent to him. The king of Ammon has been thoroughly refuted. He claimed to be attacking Gilead to regain territory lost to Israel during the time of Moses, Judges 11 verse 13. Jephthah's responses came in several categories. Historically, the Ammonites never possessed the land at all, Judges 11 verses 18 to 19, 22 to 23. Theologically, God gave the land to Israel when they were attacked by the resident Amorites, Judges 11 verses 15 to 17, 20 to 21, 24. Personally, greater kings than Ammon's current ruler knew not to go to war for this land, Judges 11 verse 25. Chronologically, it's been centuries since Israel arrived and no attempt has been made to retake the region, Judges 11 verse 26. The enemy ruler does not listen. It's entirely likely his claim was openly fabricated. He has already mounted his war effort, Judges 10 verses 17 to 18, 11:4. Jephthah is the one who sent messages asking for a reason for the coming attack, Judges 11 verses 12 to 13. The Ammonite king responded, but he doesn't feel the need for a good excuse. He believes he will simply defeat the people of Gilead and take their land, whether his cause is just or not. From Ammon's perspective, there were reasons to confidently ignore Jephthah's appeal to the Lord's authority. The Ammonites and Philistines have been oppressing Israel for 18 years at this point, Judges 10 verses 6 to 8. They have no reason to assume Israel suddenly became strong enough to resist. Also, until very recently, the Israelites had been worshipping the same false pagan gods as everyone else. It's understandable that the king of Ammon would care little about a threat on behalf of a god whom the Israelites so willingly ignored. For their part, Jephthah and the Israelites are hopeful the Lord would respond to their repentance, delivering them from their enemies once more. Confirmation of this will not come until after Jephthah has taken power and he is inspired to launch a counterattack, Judges 11 verse 29. Verse 29. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. This is the text's first indication that God has legitimately endorsed Jephthah as a deliverer of Israel from her enemies. It's also the first indication to the reader that the Lord is responding to Israel's repentance from serving other gods and request for deliverance, Judges 10 verses 10 to 16. God sends his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, on Jephthah. This apparently happens as Jephthah seeks to recruit additional fighters to take on the Ammonites. The Holy Spirit also came on Gideon when the time came to recruit fighters and attack Israel's enemies, Judges 6 verse 34. The sense of this passage is that Jephthah is supernaturally empowered to raise and lead an army of God's people into battle. This verse vaguely describes Jephthah's route as he passes through both Gilead and Manasseh. He returns to Mizpah in Gilead, Judges 11 verse 11, before attacking the Ammonites. Passing through Manasseh suggests Jephthah may have raised fighters outside of his region of Gilead, as well as from within. Context summary: Judges 11 verses 29 to 40 begins with God's Spirit coming on Jephthah and empowering him to raise an army from Gilead and Manasseh. Before attacking the Ammonites, Jephthah makes a vow regarding victory in the war. When Israel wins the victory, Jephthah's vow surprisingly binds him to offer his daughter, his only child, as an offering to the Lord. She agrees that her father must follow through on this sacred promise, but she first spends 2 months grieving that she will not marry or have children. Jephthah fulfills his vow, though scholars have long debated how, exactly, he did so. Verse 30. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will give the Ammonites into my hand." Until recently, Jephthah has been presented as strong, confident, and even wise, Judges 11 verses 7 to 12. Only recently was it stated God's Spirit was with him, Judges 11 verse 29. Here, however, facing battle with a superior force in the Ammonites, Jephthah's boldness comes across as foolishness. During this part of Israel's history, people often made vows to God, hoping to earn his favor. In that culture, a vow was a solemn and unbreakable promise, more binding than how the term promise is used in modern English. Vows made to others were serious; those made to the Lord are said to be especially dangerous and dishonorable to break, Numbers 30:1-2. The writer of Ecclesiastes warned, "When you vow a vow to God, do not delay paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools." Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? Ecclesiastes 5 verses 4 to 7. Jesus' warning about the nature of vows is concise: do not take an oath at all, let what you say be simply yes or no, anything more than this comes from evil, Matthew 5 verses 34 to 37. In that context, Jesus was warning about using vows and promises to add credibility to one's promises. An honest person keeps their word, without layering on vows to prove their sincerity. Jephthah's vow comes across as especially unnecessary. Commentators are not sure if he's being arrogant, insecure, or even attempting to manipulate the Lord. In any case, he wants God to give him victory over the Ammonites. He vows to make an enormous and tragic sacrifice in exchange for success, rather than trusting God to do what is best for his people. Verse 31. Then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. This verse, and its relationship to Judges 11 verse 39, are among the most debated phrases in all of Scripture. Jephthah is making a vow, a solemn, serious promise to God, Numbers 30:1-2, which will eventually bring him enormous pain. Some commentators suggest Jephthah made this vow carelessly, in a moment of insecurity or fear about impending battles with the Ammonites, Judges 11 verses 4 and 28. Others point out that Jephthah seems to be a natural negotiator. He carefully approached the leaders of Gilead about their offer to become their leader, Judges 11 verses 5-11. He attempted to reason with the king of Ammon before going to battle, Judges 11 verses 12-15. Now he seems to bargain with the Lord, or, as some see it, he attempts to manipulate a victory from God. What Jephthah asks for is twofold: the defeat of the Ammonites and to return from the war to his own home in peace. What he vows in return is described using phrasing which can be interpreted in several ways. He refers to either a person or a thing. He does not specify the first thing but simply indicates whatever/whoever. Those things or persons will belong to the Lord, either as a burnt offering or like a burnt offering. Virtually all commentators agree Jephthah's vow is foolish, though some believe he was speaking out of deep piety and conviction. Where most disagreement comes regards his intent. Did he imagine an animal coming out to meet him? Was he planning on a human sacrifice? Did he mean to commit a person to the Lord completely, as if they were a burnt offering? Arguments abound for almost every possible combination of these views. Israel had, in fact, been serving all the gods of the region. They may have been practicing human sacrifice before repenting and serving the Lord once more, Judges 10 verses 10-16. God's law strictly forbade human sacrifice of any kind, Deuteronomy 12 verse 31, 18:10. Yet Jephthah clearly hadn't lived in close devotion to God's law. Until recently, he led bandits in the land of Tob, Judges 11 verses 1-3. It is at least possible Jephthah intended to offer to God a human sacrifice, perhaps of a servant. He may have wrongly imagined God would be pleased with this offer and would grant victory over the Ammonites. It's also possible Jephthah knew that many people and animals would come from his household to meet him when he came back in victory and planned to devote some or all of those to God in some way. God's strong distaste for human sacrifice and Jephthah's sincerity of faith, flawed as it was, strongly reduced the likelihood that he deliberately planned to kill someone for this vow. Most likely, his intent was to entirely devote something to God, either by animal sacrifice or personal dedication. As it happens, Jephthah will obtain victory, then face the consequences of this ill-advised promise to God. Verse 32. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. Empowered by the Lord's Spirit, Jephthah rallies an army of Israelites and brings them back to Mizpah. After making his unwise vow to God, Judges 11 verses 30-31, he brings his forces to where the Ammonites are gathered for battle. The people of Israel strike first, and the Lord gives Jephthah victory. After extensive build-up, the actual battle itself is described in just 2 verses. This anticlimax highlights the foolishness of Jephthah's vow. The Lord was already clearly with him and intent on giving him victory over Ammon. This raises questions about Jephthah's understanding of the situation. Why would the Lord's Spirit have come upon Jephthah if the Lord were not with him? And if the Lord was already with him, why did Jephthah feel the need to make a vow to convince God to do what God clearly already wanted to do? Verse 33. And he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities, and as far as Abel-keramim, with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. Jephthah and his army of Israelites did not edge out a close victory over the Ammonites, Judges 11 verse 32. They appear have taken the fight straight to the enemy, both in Gilead and perhaps some distance into the territory of Ammon to the east. The Israelites rout and remove the Ammonites from 20 cities, including the 3 locations mentioned. These may have been fortified cities where the Ammonites had dug in during the years of oppression over Israel, Judges 10 verses 7-8. The Israelites dug them out, perhaps along a generalized border between Gilead and Ammonite territory in the wilderness. The Ammonites were completely subdued, and Israel was freed from their oppression. Verse 34. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah. And behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child, besides her he had neither son nor daughter. Jephthah had offered a foolish vow to God, Judges 11 verses 30-31, in hopes of military success over the Ammonites. This was a victory God clearly already intended to deliver. In exchange for victory and safe return of himself to his home, Jephthah promised an extreme sacrifice. Depending on his exact intentions, this could infer a wide range of meanings. It may imply human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, or being permanently devoted to God's service. Whatever Jephthah intended, he clearly had not planned to include his daughter. Triumphant following the utter defeat of the Ammonites, Jephthah returns to his house in Mizpah. He was fully aware of his vow to the Lord and probably anxious to see who or what would be required. Rather than a servant or animal, it is his joyful daughter. She comes out dancing, shaking tambourines, and celebrating his success and return. The weight of Jephthah's vow grows as we see how happy and full of life his daughter is. It amplifies further when the text notes she is his only child. Jephthah will not take this well, Judges 11 verse 35. Verse 35. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter! You have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. Those used by God often defy our assumptions about spiritual heroes. The rescuers, Judges 2 verse 16, who emerge in the book of Judges are not the spotless superheroes we might imagine. Gideon made foolish choices, Judges 8 verses 26-27, as will Samson, Judges 13:16. Jephthah is already a complex character, as an exiled bandit captain hired to fight against the Ammonites, Judges 11 verses 1-11. He also made a deeply misguided promise to God in exchange for military victory, Judges 11 verses 30-31. Jephthah clearly never imagined when he made his vow to the Lord that it would be his only child, his daughter, who would emerge from his house to greet him upon his return from battle. The pain is real. He immediately begins to express his deep grief by tearing his clothing, a common expression of mourning a great loss during this era. Jephthah cries out that she has caused him intense pain, crushing him with grief. That seems to blame his joyful, innocent daughter for causing him pain, though he fully realizes she is not responsible. By any standard, the fault rests entirely with Jephthah. Jephthah explains to his daughter that he is grieving because he cannot take back a vow he has made to the Lord. He cannot save her from his own foolishness in this sacred promise to God. That's not necessarily accurate. The law compensated for ignorant vows, Leviticus 4 verses 5-6. Whether that escape clause applies here, however, is something over which scholars differ. As far as Jephthah is concerned, this is a tragically unbreakable promise. Verse 36. And she said to him, My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites. The courage, respect, and submissiveness of Jephthah's daughter is almost as impressive as his apparent selfishness and folly. She has just learned of Jephthah's vow, Judges 11 verses 30 to 31, about whatever came to greet him after his victory. As it happens, that was her, Judges 11 verse 34. That, at the very least, means her father had promised to devote her entirely to service to God. At worst, it meant she was pledged as a human sacrifice. In deep grief, Jephthah has said he cannot go back on his vow, Judges 11 verse 35. His daughter doesn't protest or resist, instead, she agrees. She says plainly that because the Lord did as Jephthah asked, he must now follow through and do to her whatever he promised, Numbers 30:1-2. This is the way of vows to the Lord, and she understands it. This unnamed daughter expresses far more maturity than her father. She does have one request, however, in the following verse, Judges 11 verse 37. The exact nature of her petition suggests a less drastic interpretation of her father's vow, but her resolute obedience is still impressive. Verse 37. So she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me, leave me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions." This and the following verses combine with Jephthah's original vow to inspire much debate, Judges 11 verses 30 to 31. Interpreters speculate about the outcome for Jephthah's daughter. His vow to offer something as a burnt sacrifice after defeating the Ammonites was foolish for at least 2 reasons. First, the Lord had already sent his Spirit on Jephthah, Judges 11 verse 29, giving him every reason to believe the Lord was already with him and poised to overthrow the Ammonites. Second, to promise something without a clear grasp of possible consequences is unwise, Proverbs 6 verses 1-3. Another plausible reason to condemn Jephthah's vow involves its possible meanings. What Jephthah promised could have meant to devote someone to God's service, or it might have implied literal human sacrifice. That was part of pagan religion in that era, but also clearly condemned by God, Deuteronomy 12 verse 31, 18:9-10. It's possible someone steeped in that culture would think of such things, even during a time of repentance, Judges 10 verses 10-16. And yet, the daughter's request here does not sound like one from someone prepared to sacrifice their life on an altar. Instead, she asks for 2 months to travel and mourn her virginity. In that culture, dying without children meant the end of one's legacy. It was considered especially tragic. The phrasing here makes it seem Jephthah's daughter is most sad about is losing the opportunity to marry and have children, Judges 11 verse 38. Commentators speculate that this is because Jephthah's vow was to devote someone to God's service, somewhat like a modern nun or monk. Alternatively, Jephthah may have taken advantage of a special provision in the law that allowed for people who had made vows to assign a monetary amount, then to pay off the vow with silver, Leviticus 27 verses 1-8. The suggestion is that Jephthah paid this amount and then committed his daughter to the service of the Lord in celibacy for the length of her life. Not all commentators agree that this is likely. Ultimately, all we know for sure is that Jephthah's daughter submitted to her fate, which meant never marrying or having children. Verse 38. So he said, "Go." Then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. Jephthah grants his daughter's request, Judges 11 verse 37. He made an ill-advised promise to God, Judges 11 verses 30-31, which wound up entangling his daughter, Judges 11 verses 34-36. She takes 2 months to travel in the mountains with her friends and grieve that she will never marry and have children. For many women and girls during this era, that was the greatest loss of opportunity they could imagine. That this is the emphasis of her mourning may or may not imply that Jephthah does not intend to sacrifice her life, only to devote her to God in some form of service. Scholars and commentators disagree about the implications presented here. Is this weeping over her lack of children, only? Or grieving for the end of her life? Either option has advocates, but it is not possible to say for certain. Verse 39. And at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel. Jephthah fulfilled his vow, Judges 11 verses 30 to 31. He allowed her 2 months of mourning with her friends, weeping that she would never marry or have children, Judges 11 verses 37 to 38. Then, he makes good on his promise. The text is clear that Jephthah fulfilled his promise to God, exactly as he had intended. It's also clear that the result involved Jephthah's daughter never having children. Other than that, there is great controversy about precisely what happens here. The original phrasing of Jephthah's vow referred to giving something to God as a burnt offering. Some scholars insist Jephthah killed his daughter and burned her body as a sacrifice to the Lord. They interpret his promise as a reflection of the pagan culture, or a misunderstanding of vows. Other commentators note it is at least possible that Jephthah fulfilled his vow by following Leviticus 27 verses 1 to 8. That would mean paying some money for her life to the tabernacle, then committing her to lifelong celibate service to the Lord. God clearly forbade human sacrifice in Israel, Deuteronomy 12 verse 31, 18:9, 10. Jephthah may have come to understand that more clearly, even if it was his first intention. Alternatively, he may have never planned on human sacrifice, and a form of permanent dedication was always his meaning. Beyond her lack of a family, which means the end of Jephthah's line, Judges 11 verse 34, we are only told that this choice brought great grief to her and, later, to other women on her behalf, Judges 11 verse 40. Verse 40. That the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in the year. End of Judges 11. Please note. The material used in this video is from BibleRef.com, which is from Got Questions Ministries and is posted here to be read by immersive reader in the Edge browser. If you copy this material, please follow these rules. Content from BibleRef.com may not be used for any commercial purposes, or as part of any commercial work, without explicit prior written consent from Got Questions Ministries. Any use of our material should be properly credited. Please make it clear the content is from BibleRef.com. BibleRef.com content may not be altered, modified, or otherwise changed unless such changes are specifically noted.